Hello everyone, how's it going? Vasco here. We are going to implement in this lesson a side effect to the thread selected action. So we have already modified in memory on the client side the data of the store so that it reflects the fact that the messages of the thread have been read by this concrete user. Now we are going to do a call to the backend server to report that the user has read these messages already. So what we are going to do is we are going to go here to the effects folder and we are going to create a new effect. We are going to call it the mark messages as read effect service. We are going to create this class. As usual, this is going to be an Angular injectable and we need to add here the parentheses in front of the annotation. Let's quickly add it to the application module that we have defined here. We are going to declare this class as containing effects by using the effects module run method. So let's quickly import this new class. Let's have a look at the import. So now let's implement this side effect. So how are we going to do this? We are going to inject in the constructor the actions observable. We are also going to inject the threads service like before. So let's define now our side effect. So this will be an observable and we are going to call it mark messages as read. So this will be derived from the actions observable. We are going to filter on the action type thread selected action. So now we are filtering only on this specific action. What we're going to do here is we are going to do a switch map from this particular action. We are going to trigger a request to the server, just like we did before. So we are receiving here the action. We are going to do a call to the threads service and we are going to call a new method that we are about to create. We are going to say that we want to mark the messages as read. Let's see in a moment what we need to pass on to this method. Right now we want to start by applying to this observable the effect annotation. Right now we need to apply to this observable the effect decorator. So let's do so. In here, because we are not generating a new action as a result of the call to the server, we are for the moment going to say that we don't want to dispatch a new action as a result of this observable. So right now we need simply to define what we need to pass into mark messages as read. Let's quickly fill in the parameters that we would need to execute this action. So we're going to add here a type annotation. We're going to say that the action that we have just filtered is of type thread selected action. So the payload of the action will contain all the necessary information. So in this case, we have the current user ID that we will need to fill in the header that we are going to send to the server that marks what is the currently logged in user. And we also have the information what was the selected thread. These two parameters are all the information that we need in order to do a call to the backend. So let's quickly fill them in. We are going to pass in first the current user and after that we are going to pass in also the selected thread ID. So let's add here some formatting to this call to mark messages as read and let's go ahead and define the signature of this method. So what we have here is an initial implementation of the method, actually the definition of its signature. We have here the mark messages as read method that takes two parameters, which are the ones that we have filled in here in the call on our side effect. Now here we are going to return an observable of any in a similar way to the save new message method. This is because we are not going to return any data as the result of this call. Now, what type of call should we use here? What type of HTTP call should we use here? Because we have already used the post call to add a new message, which is actually a good way to use the post call. In the case of the mark messages as read, this is an operation that, unlike the save new message, can be called multiple times and we should get exactly the same result. So the first time that we mark the messages as read, the server is updated, but if we repeat multiple times the same call, there will be the same result. So this is not a good use case for post. This would be typically to put, but put would be to replace the value of a thread with a completely different value of a thread. So in this case we are going to use patch. the patch operation. So we are going to call the HTTP service and we are going to do a patch call. Now the URL that we are going to pass on is the /API/threads, and here we are going to pass in the selected thread as part of the URL itself. Now let's see later what we're going to fill in here as the payload of this request. Right now we simply want to call the common HTTP headers function, and we want to populate the value of the current user ID. Now what should be the payload of this patch call? Well, normally this should be values from the thread itself, but we can also use the patch call to, for example, trigger certain modifications in the overall thread without having to provide all the values for it. So let's say that, for example, we want to mark the thread as red for the current user. We can simply do something like this. We pass in the property red to true to the backend. So the backend that we have currently running will detect the value of this red property as being true, is going to go to the thread and it's going to mark the messages as being read for the user that made this HTTP request. This should be all that is needed to implement this functionality. Let's try it out. If we switch to the browser, we have here the same situation as before, so Alice and Chuck, and Alice is in a thread with Bob, but not with Chuck. So let's fill in here a message, hello Alice. So as before, the unread messages counter is set to 1 and the thread is marked as unread. Now, when we hit the thread, a request was sent to the backend. And if we go back here, we can see that the thread is marked as read on the client side. Now, if we reload the application and we choose again the user Alice, we can see that the thread is still marked as read on the server. So this concludes the functionality of our application. The chat is working as expected, it supports multiple users, it marks the messages as unread, and the unread messages counter is always consistent with the reminder of the information on the screen.